Ahlan wa sahlan, welcome all. Inshallah, we are going to be waiting for the virtuous Sheikh. Ja'a Sheikh, mashallah, the Sheikh has come. Let me give permission. How does this thing work? Yeah, we are ready, bruv. We are ready. Has it worked? Has it worked?
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam, rahmatullah, ahlan wa sahlan, brother. How are you?
Alhamdulillah, how's things with you?
Alhamdulillah, we are good, brother. Alhamdulillah. I'm happy to have you here, brother, today for our conversation. I've been meaning to touch base with you ever since I heard about your project that you've got going on. And I think it's fascinating, especially as I'm super bullish on people, Muslims in particular, but just generally people, but finding new ways to bypass the fiat system and to essentially adopt the Bitcoin standard. So before we get onto exactly what that project is, for those who those who somehow don't know who you are, can you just give us a basic intro as to who you are, brother, and what's your background?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Haris Irfan. I am the CEO of a company called Cordoba Capital Markets, or CCM for short. It is an Islamic finance company. I was the former co-founder of the Deutsche Bank Islamic finance team in the early 2000s. I spent 11 years at Deutsche Bank. We did a lot of interesting things back then. We essentially invented the modern Sukuk market and the modern Islamic finance structured investment product market. So a lot of interesting stuff was going on at the time. I have to say that not all of it was good in retrospect, although all experience is good experience, and I learned a lot of things from that. But I would say that there's a lot of things that we can do today to correct the mistakes of the past. So I have a lot to say on the theme of Islamic banking and Islamic finance in general. After Deutsche, I was the global head of Islamic products at Barclays, when it was called Barclays Capital. And then I came back to the UK. I was in the Middle East. I came back to the UK in 2012, and I worked for a British Islamic bank called European Islamic Investment Bank, where I was head of investment banking. And that was for about 5 years before I struck out on my own. And I have set up an Islamic fintech firm called CCM, which finances working capital on a risk-sharing basis through listed, what we call PPNs, profit participating notes, which are like bonds, but share the profits between investors in the company. And we do that for medium-sized companies. And that's something I think we're probably going to talk about in some depth today. I think what I would say is that it's fairly unique in the Islamic finance industry, because one of the criticisms of Islamic banking in general is just a replication of the conventional banking industry. So we can talk about that in more detail as well.
That's actually my next question, actually, because essentially what you just described there is that you were in the Islamic finance area. You could say using the belly of the beast, and he was in there for a while, actually, and he was a very important piece of the puzzle. But then you left it and decided to do your own thing and try and take a different approach. So before we talk about that new approach, what was wrong with what was the old system? What was wrong with it?
So I guess it's helpful for me to give a sort of a brief history lesson. The first Islamic finance experiment of the modern era was something called the Midghammer experiment, it's a town about 80 kilometers from Cairo. In 1963, a famous Egyptian economist set up a social savings institution, and this institution takes in money from investors or depositors, and it invests it in local industry. And then the profits from those companies is shared with the depositors. So that's a true mudaraba, which is a type of investment arrangement. And that's what that social savings institution became, a sort of, it became I believe, a regulated social savings institution. There were 8 more like it in Egypt at the time. And then about 10 years later, you have the development of commercial Islamic banks, and the first multilateral, which was the Islamic Development Bank. So you've got all these things happening in the 60s and 70s that eventually morph into the Malaysian banks in the 80s doing a little bit more sophisticated stuff. It's pretty much based on a type of contractual structure called commodity murabaha, which we'll come on to, which is essentially a synthetic proxy for a loan with interest. And then by the early 2000s, the big investment banks, Deutsche Bank, comes on the scene and says, hang on a minute, there's 2 billion people out there who are being given a diet of, pretty unsophisticated financial services from specialist Islamic banks. Let's take our more entrepreneurial people within the organization who are used to solving complex puzzles and work within the parameters of Sharia and see if we can create a whole suite of financial products and services for Muslim customers. And that's what they did. So there was a big catalyst in the market, a big exponential growth in the early 2000s, started by Deutsche Bank. And then the financial crisis happened. We have a lot of the big banks retrenching and focusing on what they know best, which is conventional banking. And the Islamic banks, the regional domestic players, step in, and it's kind of very slow and parochial and stagnates. And we're in a situation today where Islamic banking is essentially fractional reserve banking by another name. And the structures they use are just, as I say, it is for a loan with interest. So I have tried to, I guess back 25 years ago, Muslims who are in this industry were, they were, I guess, ideologically driven. They wanted to do the right thing. They wanted to create wholesome halal products. Some of them are still in the industry. They never really saw the wood for the trees. Some, like me, decided that it became important to change the industry from within, and we had to leave it in order to start up something new and parallel to the banking industry. Because as long as you are in an Islamic bank or the conventional window of the Islamic window of a conventional bank, then you are essentially participating in the same fractional reserve system. So for those who are, this is a fairly savvy group of listeners. I can tell, looking at them, I recognize some names. It's clear that there's many people who understand fiat and fractional reserve and Bitcoin and issues like that. I probably don't have to explain it too much, but what I would say just very briefly is fractional reserve banking is a type of legalized fraud because you are creating money from nothing. Bank takes in a deposit and it lends out more than it has in deposits, and that new money is created at the stroke of a keyboard. It is. If you were a Martian and you landed on planet Earth and you saw what banks did, you would conclude it's a type of sort of collective madness. How do they just create money from nothing? Right. So there's clearly something it's not common sense, and yet we've come to accept it. And so, the world has become Keynesian. We think that fiat money is the only correct money. We think that printing is a way to solve crises. We believe that financialization is the way the world must be. When I say financialization, what I mean is, it's the development of modern financial capitalism, which is essentially from, the era 1980s onwards to the present day, where, financial services account for a disproportionate amount of the world economy. The real economy is a fraction of it. Companies that make real things in factories or provide real services in your high street. This is the real economy, and it's as I say, it is dwarfed by the financial economy. So this modern trend towards financialization is an inevitable consequence of fiat money, of infinite money printing, of this sort of vulture capitalism we have today that leads to an infinite and perpetual state of war. And again, this group I know is pretty savvy on these subjects, so I won't dwell on it too long. But that's essentially how we got to where we are. And Islamic banking, I thought, was a solution about 20 years ago. And the more time I spent in it, the more I realized it was an oxymoron. And I've used this phrase before. You can't be a bank, which is a fractional reserve money creating institution, and yet be Islamic, because money creation out of nothing is people argue with me over this. Oh, that's not the definition of riba, brother. Riba is this, that, and the other. Well, if you create money from nothing, that's an excess. That's a surplus. That's the literal meaning of the word riba. So how is it not riba? So, I think that anything that is fractional reserve banking has to be based on a fundamental pillar of riba. And as much as we have tried, and I've tried to do it, dress up contractual structures in purer forms by using ijara, musharaka, wakala, istisna, and so on. At the end of the day, the basis on which you are building these products, the foundations are fractional reserve banking, which I believe is riba.
Mm-hmm.
So all we end up doing is reverse engineering debt instruments, and we don't actually create true risk-sharing instruments to finance businesses. Anyway, that's, I guess, a potted history.
Okay, but there was one thing that you mentioned really intrigued my interest. And you mentioned that in the 80s, I think, or the 90s, that the Malaysia tried to do something.
Mm-hmm.
And then from that, Deutsche Bank saw opportunities, came in and produced their product. But out of curiosity, what exactly was the difference between what Malaysia had done and what Deutsche Bank had done?
So the Malaysian banks were basically building on what had been done in the 60s and 70s. And the scholars at the time decided that it was acceptable to use this particular contractual structure called commodity murabaha, or sometimes you might hear the phrase tawarruq. And this particular contractual structure was accepted by scholars as being a little less pure than it could be. But they accepted it as an interim measure so that Islamic banks could establish themselves and create financial products, and then they should move towards purer financial structures later on, which never really happened.
Mm-hmm.
So, we had a situation where a lot of debt financing was done during using this instrument. And the analogy I make is with contractum trinius, which is the medieval construct used by financiers in the Middle Ages to circumvent church law. The church, of course, said usury is forbidden. And in order to circumvent this, financiers said, well, if I can't have a loan with interest, then I'll create 3 separate contracts, each of which is compliant with church law, but not one of which actually involves interest. But when you combine these 3 contracts, you end up having a loan with interest. And the church said, well, I guess each one looks compliant to me. So, they essentially turned a blind eye. And contractum trinius was born. And then eventually, after hundreds of years, the church turned a completely blind eye to all forms of interest and usury. And that was a sort of creeping normalization of riba in the church. And Islam is experiencing its own creeping normalization of riba right now, because we've seen this initial fatwa in the 80s of scholars saying, you can use commodity murabaha or tawarruq, to get things going for now. But very soon in the future, I would like you to use risk-sharing arrangements like wakala or, musharaka or mudaraba or whatever, so that, we move towards a purer form of financing where the financier and the individual or the company are both sharing in risks and rewards. And that never really happened. Because, of course, once bankers get hold of one generic fatwa, they say, oh, right, okay, that's my job done. Let's just print a whole lot of money with this. And that's what they did. So that's essentially where we got to in the 80s and 90s. When Deutsche Bank came along, there was a particular individual within Deutsche Bank who was a very senior individual. He was global head of equity derivatives and on the ExCo, the executive committee of the bank, which is the most senior management level of the bank. And he said, and we call him the godfather of the Middle East. He said, I want to put a guy down there in the Middle East, and I want you to create the Islamic Big Mac. And we said, well, what does that mean, the Islamic Big Mac? And what he essentially said was, look, everywhere you go in the world, if you walk into a McDonald's, you get exactly the same product. Now, it doesn't matter whether you think the product is good or bad. The point is that this company has managed to replicate the same thing at a cheap cost all over the world. And consumers like it. Rightly or wrongly, they like it. They want to buy it. So I want you to go out and create a product that is cheap and accessible to all Muslim customers and repeatable and scalable all around the world. So that was our brief. And he put me down there in the Middle East, and I was the first Deutsche banker on the ground in Dubai. We arrived around the time of that Sheikh Mohammed was looking at creating his own version of the city, the square mile, and it was called DIFC, or Dubai International Financial Center. And as it happened, Deutsche Bank was chosen as the first investment bank advisor to set it up. And so there I was, completely by chance in the thick of it, creating Islamic finance product. And Deutsche Bank was the first international investment bank to really get its head around what does it mean to be Sharia compliant, how to produce Sharia compliant instruments, because they took an entrepreneurial approach to it. They appointed a lot of, equity derivative structurers. Structurer is a term that you use in an investment bank to describe a product engineer, a financial engineer. They're the guys who design and build the actual financial product. If you have a Formula One race team, it's the engine designer or the chassis designer. They're really smart guys, right? And they sit there and they work out how to make this car faster than anybody else. And that was our job. We were structurers. We were there to solve this complex puzzle, which takes account of legal, of Sharia, of tax, of jurisdictional issues. And you create a financial instrument. So no bank had ever sat down before and said, how do I create, for example, a structured investment product with a complex payoff structure? Or how do I create a hedging platform so that a company can say, okay, how do I hedge my foreign exchange risk? For example, if all my costs are in euros and all my revenues are in dollars, how do I hedge against the risk of currency rates moving against me? And we could produce an Islamically compliant, a Sharia compliant instrument that could hedge them. Similarly with commodity prices, similarly with believe it or not, interest rates. And we could create almost any kind of financial instrument that was possible in the conventional space, and it would be Sharia compliant. And in fact, in the process, we had a generic fatwa, which later on came to be known as the Doomsday Fatwa by one very famous scholar, because it allowed us to replicate the return from literally any investment instrument or asset class. So, of course, you could take anything haram and effectively make it halal, which, of course, is nonsensical. Of course, you can't do that. It's like having halal beer or halal pork. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. So we had this generic fatwa, and unfortunately, it was abused by the sales. The investment banks are run by salespeople, and they run around selling this stuff and say, "I can give you anything you want" to a client. And before you know it, you're selling all kinds of crazy stuff to investors, and this created quite a spat in the industry between two famous scholars, Sheikh Hussein Hamid Hassan, who was the architect of our program at Deutsche Bank, who was described as the grandfather of modern Islamic finance. And you had a gentleman called Sheikh Yusuf de Lorenzo, an American scholar, who said that this is a very dangerous fatwa. And, he described it as the Doomsday Fatwa. And he was right, actually. It was, it was our own version of the Manhattan Project, where, we're essentially creating the atom bomb before the other side does. And this weapon of mass destruction, this financial weapon of mass destruction has been invented, and we've unleashed all sorts of havoc by doing so. And eventually the market was spoiled and people were selling all sorts of crazy stuff. But in a way, thankfully, it sounds odd to say it, but thankfully the financial crisis happened and investors were no longer interested in buying these sorts of instruments. So that actually was a natural break in what was going on at the time. And I looked for alternatives. How do we create a wholesome, a tayyib Islamic finance world, as opposed to merely a permissible or halal world? How do we create financial instrument that is actually good for society, that is socially useful, not socially useless? And it was it took a long time to work that out. I actually had my first brush with Bitcoin in 2017 when I was delivering a lecture on Islamic finance. By that time, my book had been in circulation for about 3 years. So all of my thought behind that book was, what I had learned in a fiat investment bank. My thinking had not really evolved beyond that. And sometimes I'm a bit embarrassed about what I've written in that book. I look back on it and think, really my thinking has evolved since then. And I can do better now, I think. I certainly don't work within that system anymore. I've left that system to set up on my own and to try to create a parallel system. But that's obviously a massive, massive task. And I'm generally considered very anti-establishment, although I do work with establishment in many ways. So many of the committees and working groups that I sit on are also, patronized by the likes of HM Treasury and the Bank of England and so on. I maintain those good relationships, but ultimately I think I'm seen as an outsider and maybe a little bit crazy. But that's good. I mean, I think nothing ever changed in the world if you just towed the party line. I think if you want to change the world, you have to act a little crazy sometimes. And it helps to know how it works from the inside. It helps to be a former insider. And it helps to have a deep understanding of how those products are put together. So once again, I come back to the idea of being a structurer, a financial engineer. If you don't know how these deals are put together, you're really going to struggle to change the status quo.
Just so that everyone, in case anyone's unaware, and what's the name of the book again, so that others can maybe have a look at the book? Or...
Yeah, it was called Heaven's Bankers: Inside the Hidden World of Islamic Finance. It was published in 2014, and essentially it's a description of what happened at Deutsche Bank in the early 2000s, and how that essentially changed the landscape for Islamic finance globally. But as I say, Heaven's Bankers is. I think the right title for the next book is God's Money, because I think that is once we've solved the money problem, we'll be able to solve the banking problem. I think I've approached it in the wrong way over the last 20 years in trying to solve the problem from inside established fiat financial institutions. I don't think it's going to change from there.
It's interesting you mentioned that, because I just had a discussion with Saifuddin, and he asked me a question with he mentioned a question about fiat system. As the fiat system is dying, he asked me, do I have a position, or do I have a view on facilitating its death by by abusing the loan structure, taking out loans and essentially buying assets and gaming the system, a bit like how Michael Saylor has his view on gaming the system.
Yeah.
And I said, beyond the fact that Islam doesn't condone doing haram to achieve righteous goals, you don't do the bad to achieve the good.
Yeah.
But put that aside, another problem which I see, which I'm actually seeing now as you're describing this history, is that when you open the door to one concession, it makes you complacent to find solutions, which is exactly what happened in Islamic banking.
Yes.
They made a small concession.
Correct.
Says, okay, we'll start off here and then we'll move over here, but the move never happens. We become happy in that corner. We never think about making and actually finding the solution, because we're happy with what we have.
Correct.
And I think it's what we actually may need is to actually go through the harder route, the difficult route of just saying, no, I'm going to exit. It's going to be difficult, but that difficulty will help me push me to the solution, which I'm hoping you can describe to us now, with your product that you have. So could you describe to us what is your product, and what was your journey in getting there?
Yeah, well said. That's absolutely right. I first of all, I'm not sure that the end justifies the means. I personally wouldn't want to take interest-bearing loans to buy Bitcoin, for example, to support the thesis that Bitcoin is the new global reserve currency and the future of money. I don't think I can do that personally. I also agree with you that this interim measure that took place in the 80s with a view to, we'll change incrementally, everything will be fine. Of course, bankers don't do that. They see the path of least resistance. And, I still know bankers in this industry who've been in the Islamic finance industry for 2-3 decades. They're happy. Their kids all went to private school and expensive universities, and they've got a nice Mercedes on the driveway, and the mortgage is paid off on the house. So why rock the boat? They make good money, and, they don't see any reason why they should bite the hand that feeds them. And I think that's sad. I think it lacks courage. I think it's cowardly, honestly. I think there's a lot of people in the industry who say, I know it's wrong, but what else can we do, brother? And I think, well, you got to fight back. You've got to change. And you're asking, what is the product? Well, I was instrumental. I was very closely involved in the development of the modern sukuk market about 20 years ago. We started at Deutsche again. We looked at how to finance large acquisition financing, leverage financing, sovereign bond issuances, huge $1 billion, $2 billion transactions. How do we finance these using sukuk, or Islamic bonds? And the structures we came up with are essentially, from a risk perspective, a replication of bonds, which are capital guaranteed and pay an interest rate as a coupon on a regular basis to their investors. And we produced these sukuk, which essentially, had an overlay of Sharia compliant contracts like musharaka, like wakala, and so on, that were, on the face of it, Sharia compliant, but again, with a combination of a type of contract we call a purchase undertaking, where the obligor, or the company that's issuing the money, has an intention or an obligation to buy back the bond at maturity, Well, you basically got a bond. So, as much as we tried in the early days to use contractual structures which were risk sharing, like Musharaka, which is an investment partnership, the reality was we ended up creating a bond by another name. And, to some extent, although I mean, I'm a little bit more sympathetic to the creation of the Sukuk market than the corporate financing market that banks do through commodity murabaha, because generally speaking, the Sukuk market was usually based on a type of investment arrangement rather than commodity murabaha. And also, it wasn't essentially itself a fractional reserve banking product. It was a capital markets instrument. And that's why I'm a little bit more sympathetic to it. That said, it still remained a bond-like transaction. So now imagine that you are a company that wants to raise capital. Let's say you're a mature business. You've been going for a few years. You have a good quality management. You've got audited accounts. You make a product that's in demand. You're profitable. And you want to expand. But you don't want to take on debt onto your balance sheet. Maybe you just, on principle, don't like to burden your balance sheet with debt. Maybe you have an ideological reason not to engage in interest-bearing transactions. But anyway, a lot of people think debt is bad, and I sympathize with that as well. And at the same time, the money that you raise, you don't want to dilute your equity. Your shareholders are already in place. You don't want to add more shareholders. You want to dilute the existing shareholding. So what do? There are some instruments out there like trade finance, for example, but again, they tend to be debt instruments. So this was a problem that I realized existed. I realized that the Islamic banks were, in theory, perfectly placed to deal with the problem, but in practice, lacked the ability and lacked the conviction to solve that problem. So they were never going to do it. Again, I think it's a sort of combination of technical incompetence and cowardice. That's what the Islamic banks have exhibited. And that's why I don't work with them anymore. They don't like me saying that. I'm sure there won't be a single banker from one of these institutions on this call right now, so I can say that, although, I'm sure at some point they'll pick up on this. The type of instrument that these medium-sized companies needs is, I believe, a risk-sharing, tradable instrument to provide them with working capital and trade finance. How do you fund their trade activities? Well, you create what I call a PPN, which is a profit participating note. It works a little bit like a bond. It's listed on an exchange, an internationally regulated exchange. It's issued by what's known as an MTN, a medium-term notes program, which is like a bond issuance vehicle, if you like, except that it agrees to share the risk with investors. So the company will issue these PPNs, and it will say, here is the underlying business activity or asset that you are financing. You have a beneficial ownership interest in that ring-fenced bankruptcy remote vehicle. So if anything goes wrong, you own it. And we agree to share with you the profits from this activity in the following ratio, X to Y, right? So it's a very simple arrangement. It's designated a mudaraba in fiqh. That's an investment management arrangement. And there are certain controls in place to make sure that investors are not left high and dry. Because naturally, one of the reasons why investors buy bonds is because they think that their capital is guaranteed, which, by the way, I think is a laughable idea. Your capital is not guaranteed when you buy a bond as much as you think that it is. Actually, I think that the bond returns that investors have been earning from Sukuk, typically it's been 3, 4, maximum 5% historically. These are incredibly low returns for the risk that investors are taking on. I certainly don't have Sukuk in my portfolio. Why would I? Even if I thought it was tayyib as well as halal, why would I buy it? The reward does not reflect the risk to me. So a lot of investors, asset managers are buying these Sukuk portfolio for their investors, and they're saying, oh, look, I'm giving you a risk-free return of 3, 4, 5%. And I'm thinking, well, there's a massive amount of risk in there. And the reason is because bankers don't do due diligence. If you had an entity that did a huge amount of due diligence on raising working capital or trade finance for a particular business, that looked at all the possible risk mitigants, that put all the necessary KPIs and internal governance controls in place, you have a platform for a very high quality financial institution. Because here you don't have bankers who are simply saying, here's 100, give me 105 back next year. You've got a financial institution saying, I've done the work. I've looked into this company. I've sat with the management. I've worked on their KPIs. I've worked on their internal governance. I've advised them on all these things. We've set up the relevant internal processes, capital call controls, back-to-back agreements, and so on. We spent months on this, doing due diligence. And now we're ready to issue. And when we issue this financial instrument, we'll make sure it is backed by this underlying asset, not a sort of ethereal relationship with some underlying asset, which is how Sukuk work today. So with Sukuk, for example, they'll say, oh, we've got this real estate asset and you're basically earning the rental income from the real estate asset, which is complete nonsense. So you look at the UK sovereign Sukuk issuance, for example, they say that they have securitized 3 buildings in Whitehall. Well, actually, the risk of this transaction is the credit risk of the British government. It is not the asset risk of those 3 buildings in Whitehall. So I don't know why you have this step in between where you have a real asset that you apparently securitize, because it doesn't actually matter. You may as well issue a normal bond with the government agreeing to repay the bond at the end. It's just a standard bond. Here we're saying that the PPN is directly linked to an actual traded business activity underneath. And here are the steps, the contractual structures in between that show you how you have beneficial ownership in those. So all of this process that's in place is there to protect the investor and to ensure a much more healthy relationship between the financial economy and the real economy. And if the whole world did this, then you wouldn't have financial crises, because you wouldn't be lending in a stupid way against subprime assets without doing any due diligence, which is how banks actually operate. Anyway, I've rambled on too long, so I'll turn the floor over to you.
No, I mean what you mentioned there. I mean, I'm almost scratching my head because you've described the PPN, the profit participated note, and to me that's literally the description of Mudaraba in books of fiqh. I mean, how exactly is it different, or would you say it's exactly the same?
I mean, it is essentially the same. Mudaraba is a very simple concept. You have the Rab al-Mal, the owner of the capital, and you have the Mudarib, the manager of the capital. Actually, the perfect example of this is the Prophet ﷺ. He was a Mudarib of other people's money. He managed money, he managed capital, and he deployed it by buying and selling goods. And then they would share the profits between financier and between the Rab al-Mal and the Mudarib. So, this is a very simple concept. It's not hard to translate into a modern contract and not modern financial contract. It's astonishing to me that nobody else does it. It's astonishing to me that people come up to me now and say, oh, wow, mashallah, brother, this is brilliant. Why has nobody done this? I've been looking for this for so long. And I think to myself, it actually is astonishing that nobody else has done it, because it's very simple.
I mean, that is literally my next question. I mean, like you said, like you mentioned about how the in Malaysia they derive their product, and Deutsche Bank they derive their products. So we've got like 1, 2, 3, 4. We've got 5, almost like 4 decades of these shenanigans. That not one person thought of just doing this. I mean, could you explain maybe some of the motivations as to why they've generally tried to stay away from that, or why would they want to do that?
Okay, so I mean, first of all, it is a departure from what banks do. Banks are debt creation machines, and this is not a debt instrument. This is essentially an equity instrument. Risk sharing is equity. Banks don't like that kind of business. That's not their business. The second is taxes is skewed in favor of debt-like instruments, because you get tax deductibility for interest repayments. You don't get tax deductibility for dividend repayments. So you have a system where people are almost coerced into raising debt for their businesses because they know they'll get a tax break off it. So until governments either make necessary amendment to their legislation, or you live in a jurisdiction where there is no essential difference, or there's no corporate tax, for example. So in much of the Gulf, Dubai is a classic example. When I first arrived in DIFC in the early 2000s, there was no income tax, there was no corporate tax, there was no VAT at the time. So you don't have discussions about the tax superiority of debt-like instruments versus equity-like instruments. And yet, because the types of institutions who were designing these financial instruments were large Western international, what they call bulge bracket investment banks, there's a natural tendency to recreate debt-like instruments, because banks want to earn interest. They want to earn from riba. It's easy for them. They got all their processes in place. And that's, I think, why PPNs never took off. We have found ways to address the tax issue. We have found ways to address the cost issue. We're making it relatively affordable for medium-sized companies to issue these PPNs. And that's always an issue because when you have a capital markets instrument, it's not unusual to pay a Magic Circle law firm, $300,000 to write a prospectus, mostly with sort of, impenetrable legalese inside it. We have found a way of producing relatively simple documentation at a relatively value for money cost so that medium-sized businesses can afford to issue this kind of financial instrument on an international stock exchange. So let's say banks want to do business the easy way. They like debt. Debt is easy for them. They don't have to do any due diligence. And tax makes it easy for companies to raise money on this basis.
So would you say that, I mean, from your experience then, that a large, maybe a large motivating force behind the perpetuation of this riba fiat system are the rules and regulations that the governments institutionalize and that they sanction, and they kind of push people into that system, and that's kind of where everyone just flows in the same direction as that river.
Yeah. So there's a top-down push. There's a top-down nudge that makes us behave in the ways that we behave, and we can either address that by by being part of the establishment and addressing those legislative issues, which is something that I engage in from time to time, or we can in parallel create a modern financial alternative, which parallels what's happening in the conventional system. It's a very tough job because nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to fight the establishment. Nobody wants to create a financial instrument that is genuinely different. What they do is tweaks on what's currently available. And it actually bothers me a lot that we have a lot of modern, we've got a lot of startup early stage Islamic fintech companies purporting to be halal and Sharia compliant. And all they're doing is basically replicating a commodity murabaha product or a fractional reserve product. And then they're saying we're halal and we're ethical. Well, I got news for you, buddy. That's neither halal nor ethical. Please stop doing it. I absolutely hate it when people take a commodity murabaha product and then they say, I've done a Sharia oh, look, what an amazing, innovative instrument I've launched, which is halal and Sharia compliant. So I urge people, whether they are seeking finance or whether they are looking to invest in something, just to read the small print. And if it says anywhere commodity murabaha or tawarruq, then, walk away.
So here's a nice little shield for Bitcoin. So do you feel that as Bitcoin is a detachment from the fiat system at some level, or at a fundamental level, you could say that this is a prime opportunity for Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ecosystem to jump on this type of business transaction and other similar Islamic models of business to try and maybe it's difficult to implement this in the old system, but maybe in the new system we can start pushing these ideas and developing these products.
I do, yes, but at the same time, I guess we've got to try and be realistic and address things step by step. Yes, it is a prime opportunity to jump on this, and my sort of ultimate end game is to have a risk-sharing financial instrument like the PPNs, but with a Bitcoin basis. Now, that's going to take time to do because, first of all, we have to have the risk-sharing instrument accepted in the fiat system, and secondly, we've got to have a large number, a critical mass of people accepting Bitcoin as a medium of exchange, not just as a store of value. So yeah, that's a great end game, but I think it'll be a lot of work to get there.
There's one thing that one I think it was what his name, but one guy mentioned. He mentioned that how we need to encourage more hodlers, and I said to him as a response, I think what we need to do is we need to encourage more use of Bitcoin rather than just hodling Bitcoin.
Yeah.
And he made a nice little reply to that, which I thought was really interesting. He said, well, you can't really build a circular economy unless you have people who actually hold the assets. And I thought that was maybe the narrative of hodling is a necessary first step. If people have Bitcoin in their hands, then that will at least give them the opportunity to actually spend when the time comes to spend. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I don't disagree. I mean, you need to have both participants in an economy. So, I mean, I think that's a perfectly valid view. We don't as yet have enough usage and adoption of Bitcoin as a medium of exchange. I think that's where we're lacking right now. We have plenty of hodlers, and I don't think that's going to change.
Mm-hmm. And okay, so in terms of this product, so at the moment, from what I'm gathering from what you've said, it seems as though it's primarily a fiat product at the moment. It's not. It hasn't really breached or broken to the Bitcoin ecosystem yet. I mean, do you have any plans to do that anytime soon?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I have to. What I'm building is really quite complex. And when I say that, I mean, one of the reasons why other fintech firms have not cracked it is because there's a whole skill set that's needed to crack it. So, there's and I use the analogy again of an F1 team. A lot of Islamic fintechs are overly focused on either marketing or tech, right? They got great people who can market the hell out of whatever it is that they're producing. Or they've got a bunch of developers and coders who are really, really good at that side of things. But they don't really have the chassis or engine designer or engineer. They don't have the guys who build the financial product, the engine itself. And that's why I think that what we're trying to do really requires a very wide understanding of modern financial markets, different jurisdictions, regulatory issues, Sharia issues, financial contracts, end-to-end programs, international capital markets, and so on. It's a bit of complex kit. We're trying to design a Formula One engine here, and we're trying to make it cheap for everybody. It's really a difficult thing to do. So, I believe we have cracked it. We're at the next stage where we're sort of about to roll it out. And I think we've got to get that right first before we try and overlay doing this in a Bitcoin environment. We have to prove that it works in a fiat environment first.
So would you say the main hurdles are more regulatory issues rather than more than anything else?
It's regulatory, it's contractual, it's cost, it's bringing together many different parties, many different stakeholders, it's jurisdictional. There's a lot of stuff to solve here first before we can move to a different monetary basis.
You mentioned a really important word there, and I'd love to get your thoughts on it. You mentioned the word jurisdiction.
Mm-hmm.
So the question is, how do we still hold this word in importance when in a world where such as Bitcoin, where we have no borders, it's a borderless money. I mean, how do you see that interplay between borderless money, yet we still have borders?
Well, I think at some point governments will have to accommodate Bitcoin. They'll have to realize that too many people are using it for them to ban it or make it illegal or make it hard. And they will seek to control it. So they'll seek to control the on and off ramps and where can they see this happening. They'll try and implement CBDCs as an alternative. And I hope people will reject it, but you never know. So, I think at some point governments will accommodate Bitcoin. And when they do, then we'll have a whole new set of tax and regulatory issues to deal with. That's not the ideal situation that I want, but I think practically speaking, that's probably what will happen. And I hope I'm proven wrong there. So yeah, go on.
So I mean, I'm from listening to your many discussions and podcasts, I'd say that you're a bit of a maverick. Yeah, you kind of go against the grain. But from my own personal experience myself, I would say I'm probably even worse than you. I'm kind of a rebel.
Yeah.
And I'll kind of like say, forget the rules, forget the regulation. Let's build an app that just does X.
Yeah.
I mean, what would your view be about such an approach? As in saying, look, I forget all the rules. I'm gonna go the whole what's it called? That Silk Road kind of approach. I'm gonna do the app.
Yeah.
I'm gonna launch it. Anyone can download it and just do it. I mean, what would be your observations or what would be your reservations actually about that kind of approach?
My reservations is eventually somebody will knock on my door and take me to jail. That's the problem. So the financial services legislation is very strict, especially in countries like the UK and the US. And if you engage in selling or marketing securities, you have to be sure to have the relevant regulatory permissions. If you don't have them, it's an offense and you can go to jail for it. So you have to be very, very careful. And the same will apply to Bitcoin. The same will apply to anything. I know that Bitcoin is not a security, but as soon as you start engaging in selling of securities on a Bitcoin base, you are engaging in regulated activity. So it sounds wonderful to be able to design a financial instrument that is, fintech, and it's on your own private exchange, and it's all Bitcoin based, and you can sell tokenization and fractional ownership in business activities which are tradable and liquid and scalable and so on. But ultimately, if you are deemed to be selling securities in a business activity, then you will get regulated or you'll get found out, and they'll knock on your door. So as much as I would love to run off and do my own thing, I have to work with the establishment, and I have to make sure I work within whatever the existing rules are. And if I don't like those existing rules, I have to lobby and work towards changing those existing rules.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, in terms of your product, you mentioned, I mean, I've been a bit confused because I know in the past you've mentioned that you've had some customers and they've had some success. But you also mentioned that you're ready to roll it out. So, what level of completion is it? Have you run it in the beta phase? Is it ready to, can anyone jump on board a PPN? I mean, could you explain some more about that?
Yeah, we already raised some funding for our first client back in April. We created a PPN, which at the time was via a Luxembourg securitization vehicle. We chose Luxembourg for various reasons, one of which is it has a good reputation, a good regulatory environment, and we want to make sure that investors are comfortable. They're not buying some crypto bros nonsense. So, this is a traditional securitization vehicle in a well-regarded jurisdiction. And that was a successful pilot. We are raising more money for that same client, but this time on a scalable PPN issuance program, what I call an MTN program, medium-term notes, which, as I say, is a sort of bond program issuance. And we analyzed 6 different jurisdictions around the world. We selected Jersey. We are incorporating a master holding vehicle in Jersey, under which you will have all these protected cells, which are like segregated companies, but they're not separate legal entities. And investors will buy listed notes on an international exchange, notes in that protected cell, which is related to a specific client issuer. So we have multiple clients lined up waiting to raise working capital and trade finance in this note form. So the clients are all there. We have to be very careful on the investor side. We cannot market to retail investors. We can only sell this product to via the appropriate arrangers and placement agents to qualified and professional investors, which it's a shame because it means that the minimum ticket size becomes $20,000 as opposed to $100. I very much like for this type of instrument to be available for everybody, but at the moment I'm really restricted by what's possible for me in the regulatory space, and I have to make sure that I am not selling to retail investors. The other thing is that all our investors are coming by a reverse inquiry at the moment, which means that they approach us, and that's fine. That's easy to do. I have to be very careful not to be doing an activity which is deemed to be outside my regulatory permissions.
So, I mean, a PPN, is that a category or type of security from what you would describe?
I mean, I have heard the term used, but it's not widely known. So if I were to say PPN to an investment banker, they'd probably say to me, huh, what does that mean? And I have to describe it because they're not used to selling that kind of instrument. So PPN is, I wouldn't say it's a term that we invented, but it's certainly one that we intend to popularize.
Okay, so as a final question, what would you, as a company owner who has been used to the idea of issuing bonds and raising capital through bonds, now he's heard about your product and he's intrigued about what you're doing. He's intrigued by the potential behind it. And let's put aside someone who's ideologically influenced. As he's not interested because you're Muslim and this is a way to get escape riba. He's looking at it from a purely financial perspective.
That's right.
What would make this more appealing to him than the bond issuance?
Right. So this is exactly the case with our first client. So our first client was an international agribusiness company called White Lion Foods. And it's a company headquartered in Singapore. Their major export is Brazil nuts. They're actually the world's largest Brazil nut exporter. It's a healthy company, excellent management. The main shareholder, I believe the sole shareholder, is an individual who's not Muslim. He's a high quality entrepreneur. He's built a fantastic business from the ground up. And he has no particular ideological interest in riba-free, interest-free finance. But, he knows that burdening his company with debt is an issue for him. And he knows that he doesn't want to dilute his equity. So this was a solution that we worked out together with his CFO. And the CFO and I created this instrument and raised money on this basis. And it's a good quality commercial way to raise money, irrespective of whether he's interested in halal or Sharia compliant. He's got no interest in what that's whatsoever. He just wants a really high quality financial instrument, a way to raise money competitively, and that he can. I mean, raising money on an international exchange as well is a good way of establishing a brand identity. And his business is at that stage where it's making the leap from a medium-sized international business to one that potentially could go, really global and really well known in the retail space. And that kind of jump requires a bit of financial recognition alongside it. And doing a listed PPN would be a good way to do that. That's why commercially, it's a very viable option for a medium-sized business. We do have some, pretty strict criteria. I mean, since doing that Thinking Muslim podcast, I got absolutely swamped. And frankly, it's just been impossible to keep on top of all the messages that I've been getting. But what I've now done is we've listed the criteria on our website as to what kind of companies we can help. We're not a venture capital firm. We don't do early stage. We don't do seed financing. We don't do startups. We are looking for mature businesses with at least 3 years of audited accounts, 3 years of $10 million plus turnover, strong, healthy EBITDA, which varies from industry to industry. Again, consistently over 3 years, strong internal management and KPIs, internal governance, no vice industries, all these criteria are listed on the website. We just want to make sure that, I'm not getting inundated with some guy coming to me and saying, I've got this great idea for crypto exchange. And I'm like, well, I can't help you, so that's in process at the moment. And, I think that it's, I did a bit of sort of back of an envelope calculation, and I figured it was a multi-trillion-dollar industry. SMEs are so underserved by banks. The halal economy is completely underserved by Islamic banks. So this is a massive multi-trillion-dollar opportunity to finance the real economy with a risk-sharing instrument. And it doesn't just have to be for Muslims either.
So I know I said that my previous question was the last one, but this is the last question. Do you see a world where Islamic banks would see the rise of something like this and they will think to themselves, you know what, this is a good idea. Let's jump on board and let's change our approach. Do you reckon that would be something that they would be thinking about, or do you reckon that it's just too ingrained within the fabric of that industry that they will just go down with the ship?
The financial service industry is driven by greed. When they see an opportunity, they will jump on it. So if they see this going successful, they will jump on it. And the early indicators, alhamdulillah, are very good. We've been approached by many different stakeholders in the industry, companies who want to raise finance, investors who want to invest their money, and other types of partners. I mean, I've had, high quality lawyers, for example, approach me and say, can I help you? Or high quality tech developers saying, I'm happy to do this for free. I mean, people are offering their services to me for free. Alhamdulillah, I think there must be barakah in this. I hope there is. Because, why else would someone offer that? Obviously, I don't want to take people's, pro bono work. I don't want to take their labor for free. I want to pay you for it if I can. I'm an early stage company myself, so I don't have a lot of money to play with. But, this is an indication to me that people are buying into this concept. It's attracting hearts and minds, which is something the Islamic banking industry has not done. But when the Islamic banks see this happening, they'll say, oh, I've got to get a piece of this action. Right? How do I do this? Let's start hiring people to make this happen. Right? And that will happen eventually when they see this. I need help. I need help spreading the word. Right? It's wonderful that people are coming to me and saying, I want to work for free. I mean, I really do appreciate that. Believe me. But, I want to have a world-class financial services offering here. I don't want to nickel and dime this. Obviously, as I say, I'm not licensed to sell to retail. I need help spreading the word. I need a network of brokers, a network of investors in different jurisdictions. I need people to get behind it and say, hey, there's this thing that's happening right now. And I think it's a really viable alternative to Islamic banking. I never thought that Islamic banking could work, but I'm seeing what this guy is doing, what these people are doing. It actually, I believe in it. I think we should make it happen. And I think if enough people want that to happen, it will happen, inshallah.
I mean, that's as a closing statement. I think that's one of the things that I think about that there's this opportunity here, and it's almost ironically, it's almost like an indirect blessing that the Islamic banks have dragged their feet so much, because it's given
Yeah,
us the opportunity
yeah,
to find that solution.
yeah. You know
Because
what? It's so
the
funny you
worst,
say that, because there have been opportunities that I thought I wanted to take and they were denied to me. Some door got closed. And I think back on it
yeah,
and I think, alhamdulillah, it was meant to be that way. It was meant to, that door was meant to
yes,
close for me so that I did this thing and it set me on this path
yes,
to do what I'm doing right now. So I can offer this
yeah.
service to people.
And I think, again, as we know, the Islamic system is in line with the fitrah. It's in line
Yeah,
with the natural
yeah,
disposition of fairness,
exactly.
love for your fellow man, and the idea of sharing risk at the very least. So what you're seeing, what you're witnessing, people willing to help out even for free. This is basically this just demonstrates the dire need that the ummah has, and that when we see any opportunity to find this to find Islam implemented on a financial level, people would just jump on it. And I think this is part of the barakah that inshallah Allah will place in your activities, and all the other activities that maybe others are working on, inshallah. So we
Inshallah.
ask Allah to make you successful in what you're
I
doing,
mean,
and we ask Allah to protect you from those who may seek to sabotage to sabotage your efforts, because no doubt with competition people would want to stop what they can. So inshallah I will give you blessing and barakah in what you're doing. And if you don't have any final thoughts, you want a closing statement you want to say to anyone, then تفضل معنا.
no, Jazakallah khair. I really appreciate that. The most powerful thing in the world is dua. I know that not
نعم.
everybody on this call is Muslim, so if you don't believe, then give me your happy thoughts. But inshallah, I think that we're onto something here, and I would really
Yeah.
appreciate people making dua for this.
Okay. And does anyone here have any questions for Sheikh Haris in this topic and what he's spoken about for the past hour?
Not a sheikh.
Well, you're old enough.
Yeah.
Does anyone have any questions? Any question you want to ask? I see here we have Muslim Bitcoin here. We have Alp here. We have Bitcoin
Yeah, I see lots of
Majlis here.
very familiar names and in some cases faces.
Sheikh Shuaib Ibn Ali. Anyone have any questions they want to ask? Even if it's just like make a dua and say thank you. Anyone here? Everyone's gone shy. Okay, see, I see a post here. Was it recorded? Yes, it was. It was recorded. Another question here I've mentioned earlier on: what is the alternative to interest-based capitalism? Hopefully, we've addressed that question here at some level.
Yeah.
Hopefully, that was a good. And I think, like I said, one thing to everyone to recognize is that this is just one of many approaches that we have addressing these challenges that we have. We have many different approaches we have. I'm just trying to give someone a permission who's asked. So as Haris was mentioning, there's one particular approach that has been taken. Where is the request? Here we are, request. So I'm new to this thing. And invite, I guess. No. Give me 1 second, guys. I'm just trying to find how to accept requests. I have it here, cancel invitation. I don't know, where is it? Cancel invitation and give it again. How request. There we go. أهلا وسهلا مسلم بيتكوينر تفضل.
No, microphone is on mute.
Yeah, they can unmute themselves. Muslim Bitcoiner. There you go.
There we go.
Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam.
Wa alaikum salam.
So I apologize. I have kids in the background, but I just just really great discussion. I guess just one quick Bitcoin related question that I had for Brother Haris. Where do you think, or how do you think Bitcoin adoption might play out in the Muslim world? And particularly, what I'm asking you, I guess, like, do you see more of a bottom-up approach to Bitcoin adoption in the Muslim world, where you have like businesses and nonprofits kind of adopt it and add it to their balance sheet, or do you see governments and scholars maybe snapping out of it and deciding, oh wait, maybe we need to pay attention to this Bitcoin thing because it's totally Sharia compliant? What approach do you think will happen if Bitcoin adoption will happen in the Muslim world?
Yeah, Jazakallah khair is a great question. I sincerely believe it will not come from governments and scholars. I've spent too long with them to realize that they are stuck in their ways. They are wedded to the dogma of Keynesianism and they will not change. And no matter how logical your argument, for some reason, their hearts are sealed. I think the bottom-up approach is much more likely to work. I think if the people adopt Bitcoin, if the people use it, then it's inevitable. And movements always happen at the people level. I think that I once a year I sit in a room with a group of scholars and academics and economists who are all from the fiat world, and they represent some very important organizations. You know, they have some very fancy titles, and as logical as you make your point, as much independent research as you can find to support your point, they simply will not believe. And there is nothing that you can do or say, unfortunately, that will change their mind. That's what I've concluded. And so it's not my, I don't put all my effort into trying to convince either government or scholars that actually Bitcoin is the most Islamic form of money ever invented. Instead, I focus on A, producing my own product, and B, working with people who want to spread the word amongst people, not amongst, governments and theologians.
Yeah, yeah, Jazakallah khairan. I've kind of arrived at a similar conclusion, and I mean it is kind of unfortunate, but at least I think that's pretty useful knowledge to have going forward. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you.
Sheikh Shuaib, تفضل.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. First of all, thank you so much, Jazakallah khairan, host, for giving me the opportunity to speak. I'm not a sheikh, so don't call me a sheikh, please. I thank Brother Haris that he joined and shared some of the most insightful points about the overall Islamic finance as a topic. The only request I have is if host and Brother Haris can conduct much spaces, on a weekly basis or at least on a monthly basis to educate the common masses about the Islamic finance, that would be wonderful.
I mean, one good thing I'm going to be doing is that this particular talk here, I'm going to try and get a recording and make it available on YouTube and other platforms, because generally speaking, when it comes to spaces, I don't know how you would access spaces after the spaces have gone. I mean, it's there if you know the link is there, but it's not something that's easily searchable. So that's one of the things I'm definitely going to be doing. With Harris's permission, obviously, is to take this and make it available so that it can easily be shared on YouTube and I'm not too sure about Rumble. I'm hearing that's now the new alternative to video sharing, but who knows? But yeah, definitely in that regard, there needs to be more efforts to get this stuff out there. And one thing I was contemplating on doing just Jum'ah gone, actually, I was thinking of having a website dedicated to listing the real world challenges that we have, and then allowing people to add their own versions of solutions. Because I think if you had one central place where everyone could just say, look, I have Bitcoin, or I like Bitcoin, but I can't do this, or I can't do that, or I like to do this, or I like to do that. Or even if it's not even Bitcoin, maybe it's just something like I want to somehow live outside of the riba system. How can I do this? How can I do that? I'm sure individually we might have our own independent solutions, but it's often not shared to others, and maybe people think, oh, it can't be done or it's not possible. I think it'd be nice if we had like a central location where everyone could just share ideas, opportunities, and more importantly, which is what I'm hoping, inspire others to seek that solution. Because that's essentially what Hans has done. He was inspired to find a solution because he saw a need and he found a solution. Whereas, I mean, many others who programmers, website developers, even just public speakers, if they just heard of a problem and here's a solution. I mean, let me give you an example of one problem, which is one thing kind of inspired me for this, is that I'm trying to get ready to go to this Indonesian conference, the Indonesian Bitcoin conference, and they've gave me a whole process of getting the visa. So I've gone to the Indonesian website, to government website, to get the visa, and to my surprise, to get the visa, I need to supply bank statements. for the last 3 months, and I need to demonstrate a minimum balance of $2,000. And I'm thinking to myself, well, how does someone who's fiat poor prove that they got money? They might have a lot of money, but in Bitcoin. So essentially, that's a problem for a Bitcoiner who's tried to exit the riba system and trying to live entirely on Bitcoin. How does he prove to a government that he actually has money if he doesn't have any of it in the bank? That's a real world challenge. How do you do that? And that's just put it out there. I mean, that's just one of the many challenges that we have in terms of that transition from the old system of trust, a trusted system whereby we essentially put all our trust in the institution of a bank. I mean, they even said as on part of the website, or part of the application process, is that an alternative to that is a letter from the bank. So if you can get a letter from the bank saying that, yeah, he's got money, or he can look after himself, then you can come to the country. Essentially, they've built a system around the bank. That's interesting. I never thought that could be a thing, but apparently it is. So advice to everyone, if you want to live on a Bitcoin standard, there are some challenges that you're going to have to deal with, and that's one of them.
Yeah, Jazakallah khair. Shoaib, thank you for that comment. I just want to add as well that I'm actually like 100% invested emotionally, time-wise, and it's all I can do to get my company up and running and successful. And I'm not really an influencer. I don't have much of a following. You know, if I were to somebody, a lot of people said to me, "Hey, why don't you do a YouTube channel or do this or do that? And you should really, you know." And I'm thinking, hey, it's all I can do just to create this thing. I mean, obviously, at some point, I'll have to have a network of people around me to help me do that. But as much as I like to, from time to time, say my point of view, and people like Sheikh Muawiyah will, invite me to speak on Spaces or YouTube or whatever, I'm happy to oblige. I think for me to do it on a regular basis will take me away from that 100% emotional and time investment that I have in my own business. So, it's up to you guys to spread the word.
I mean, one thing, just to add to that, one thing I have found with the Bitcoin community, Muslim and non-Muslim alike, is that because it's so much in line with this solution that we are all dying to have. We're all dying to have some exit from the banking system. We're all dying to have an exit. Even if you're not Muslim, you just want to exit the banking system, because of this urge, this real and genuine urge.
Yeah.
What you would find is that people would work for free, like you said. They would do anything just to participate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, Harris is doing his project, and he's doing what he can to provide a solution. I believe genuinely that if his product is good, others will take up the mantle and say, "You know what, this is really good. I want to do a YouTube video about it. I want to interview Harris." You find others will take up the mantle. So I don't have any fears or belief that it won't happen. I reckon even if Harris and myself did nothing, others will do something.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that I think, as long as the product is good and it's actually solving a real world problem, people will take up the mantle and do something.
Yeah.
We have a question from Abu. I think I can't remember best. Abu Chill, is it? Abu Chillin. Go Abu Chillin.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Abu Chillin, yeah. You might recognize my voice. I don't know.
I think I do. Yeah.
Maybe I do.
I've spoken to you both in person.
Yeah.
But you both don't know who I am, I think. So I wanted to ask, thank you very much for the space. I wanted to ask, why do you think this innovation is happening in the West as opposed to the Muslim world? I'm guessing it's because of the technical knowledge base in the West. And then second question is, of the sort of 20K pieces of the promissory note that you did, what was the uptake in the Muslim world as opposed to the Muslim community in the West?
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. So why is innovation taking place in the West? I think it's because of critical thinking skills. Sorry to say, but I don't find it in the Islamic world. There's a lot of rote learning. There's a lot of sort of lip service paid to, oh, we must have great educational institutions. And then they just throw a bunch of money at having some franchises of London Business School or whatever, in DIFC, right? That's not really creating great institutions. So I think there's a lack of critical thinking. I think when we created these Islamic finance solutions back in the early 2000s, we imported our staff from London. We set them up in Dubai, but we brought them in from London. And they were, as I say, equity derivative structurers, that kind of thing. These were people who had degrees in maths and physics. They were just capable of quality thought and solving problems. And I think that's why innovation is taking place in the West, even in Islamic finance, or back then at least. Remind me, what was your question about the $20,000 ticket size?
Yeah, so my question was, what was the uptake? Did you find investors from the Muslim world, or was it investors from the West who happened to be Muslim?
It was not even necessarily Muslim. We had a lot of uptake from high net worth individuals who were just looking for who were not Muslim, who were looking for a quality investment.
And you see that as a strength?
Oh, massively, massively. Muslims, especially Islamic banks, are followers, not leaders. It's extremely upsetting to me, but that's just a reality. You will never find innovation coming from the Islamic banks. Sorry to say it. It will happen from the likes of Deutsche Bank. I mean, the likes of Deutsche Bank pulled out from the Islamic finance space because they had other things to focus on post the financial crisis. But if they were still in that space, that's where all the innovation would happen, because they got smart people.
Which is sad to say.
So do you not see an angle for... Sorry, I was just going to say, do you not see an angle for marketing this to the Muslim world if you can get yourself in front of the right people? And then I think we all know that the banks react in a particular way when certain individuals or certain entities in the Muslim world act in a certain way. So just like a hypothetical, Aramco invests in one of these, people are going to take notice, and then you've immediately got your... the kind of influence that you want with Deutsche Bank or whoever.
So my experience of dealing with financial institutions in the Middle East is that they just want real estate. Okay, they don't want to think too much. Real estate is easy. They can understand it. Anybody can invest in real estate. You can see, touch, and feel it. There's nothing complicated to do when you buy a piece of real estate. The moment you start talking about private equity or venture capital or structured investment products or anything very non-vanilla away from real estate, they struggle to get their heads around it. They just want to deal with stuff they can see, touch, and feel. So when you're talking about a listed instrument that invests in underlying trade finance activities in note form, their head explodes. And I find it very difficult to explain this concept to family offices and high net worth individuals in the Middle East, in the Gulf, because I'm not discussing real estate. And when they say things like alternative investment, alternative assets, real assets, when they talk about income generation, almost always they are just talking about property. And so, if I'm talking about something that's actually relatively innovative, I need to be talking to people whose minds are creative, who can think in creative ways, who see the opportunity. And that's why the people who are interested in backing my venture are in fact non-Muslim. Can you believe it? And we fall between two cracks. On the one hand, Silicon Valley doesn't look at the halal economy. It doesn't know anything about it, doesn't know anything about the Muslim demographic. On the other hand, Islamic financial institutions are relatively parochial and sleepy, and they do their very simple debt-based products, or they buy real estate. So, cutting edge, early stage Islamic fintech companies are pretty much off their radar. They can't really get their heads around it. And the ones that they have invested in are just huge marketing machines. They're just marketing machines. There's not a lot of product behind it. And what I'm doing is creating the Formula One engine for the price of a Ford. And it's too hard for them to understand that.
Do you reckon there's a connection between that way of thinking and the lack of adoption of Bitcoin?
I'm sure, yes. I think it's a lack of critical thinking, 100%.
I was going to ask a question to both of you about taqleed, because in my personal life, like in my friendship circle, I have like very highly educated friends who do really silly things when it comes to their finances, and they're just not willing to use their brains, and half of the things that they're getting involved in are haram. And then when you try to explain it to them, it's, oh, this sheikh said, and it's just the most frustrating thing ever. and I can't help but feel personally, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, I can't help but feel that there is a level of taqleed in this age that is inappropriate with highly educated people, you know, people that have had 20 years of education, who just, you know, when it comes to anything, they'll use their brains, but when it comes to their finances or getting a fatwa for a particular thing, they don't even want to look into it. And even, you know, looking into it yourself and asking a question or two is problematic. So I don't know what you guys think, whether a culture of taqleed, religiously speaking, has kind of led to this issue.
So I'm in the fortunate position where I'm an industry insider. So, you know, I know how Islamic finance works. And if I want a particular type of investment product, I know where to go to find it. And of course, the vast majority of people are not in that fortunate position. So, you know, I also get to see at the coalface how things are done, how products are structured, how they're sold, how you get fatwas for them. And I work closely with the Sharia scholars as well to make that happen in the past. And it's interesting because when it comes to the subject of Bitcoin, I think the received wisdom is so powerful, the dogma is so powerful that, and also, you know, scholars are often paid by fiat institutions, whether that is the government, whether that is a central bank, whether that is a private sector bank. They are paid by institutions not to question that status quo. So that creates an inherent conflict of interest. And that is one reason why I say when it comes to the subject of Bitcoin specifically, don't listen to the scholars unless they agree with Bitcoin. Because the ones that I have seen writing about Bitcoin positively have truly analyzed the underlying fundamental issues correctly. About 6 years ago, I watched a video of a very famous sheikh in the UK delivering a diatribe against Bitcoin and crypto in general. And almost every sentence had a major factual inaccuracy. He clearly didn't understand how the modern financial and monetary system works. He had a massive misunderstanding. His gap was so vast that I thought he's causing incredible harm to the ummah, to the Muslim community in general, by saying Bitcoin's haram. He clearly didn't understand some of the basic facts. So on that basis, I have reached the conclusion that when it comes to a subject like Bitcoin, you simply cannot follow vast majority of scholars because their basic understanding of the subject matter. I mean, you wouldn't ask your plumber to do brain surgery on you, would you? You'd ask a neurosurgeon. So why are we asking social media scholars to give us their opinion on, for example, structured investment products or Bitcoin? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. So I think the common sense view here should be where a scholar has detailed technical understanding of the underlying discipline, then sure, their opinion is valid and worth something. But when they are revealing basic factual misunderstanding and inaccuracies, then I'm sorry, we just simply can't listen to them.
And also, I think a mistake that we make as people who ask scholars questions, and is that sometimes we seem to think that because they're well knowledgeable about the deen, somehow that transfers to everything.
Yeah.
And it's hard to, and when you say to someone, oh, but the sheikh doesn't understand about Bitcoin, it's almost offensive. How can you say the sheikh doesn't understand about Bitcoin? He's a sheikh. Yeah, but because Bitcoin is not an Islamic knowledge. Why would his knowledge of the Quran and Sunnah necessarily make him an alim of hashim and private keys and mining? So I think it's just, and maybe, I'm not saying this is true, but maybe at some level, maybe some scholars have even themselves been deceived to think that because they do know a lot about the deen, that Bitcoin can't be more difficult than that. It must be very simple. And I've had many people belittle the topic, thinking, how difficult is it to know about Bitcoin? It's just this, it's just that. No, it's not just this and it's just that. It's like anything. You have to take time. You have to do your due diligence and find out about how things actually work. And fundamentally, unfortunately, I think the beginning of the problem was actually before Bitcoin. As the Sheikh Hadis mentioned, is that the beginning of the problem was their understanding of the current system.
Yeah.
If you cannot understand how fiat works and how banking works, then you cannot understand how the importance of Bitcoin. It's just not possible. It just can't happen.
Yeah.
So that's just how I view it. That's why even when I did my video series about Bitcoin and establishing the halal case of Bitcoin, before I even addressed the topic of whether Bitcoin is halal, I made, I think, 2 or 3 videos specifically on how fiat works, because you have to. You can't even open that discussion unless you understand how fiat works. You can't.
Yeah.
And that's the unfortunate reality. But I do think now that with social media, number one, with the many collapses we're seeing, the dot-com bubble and the housing bubble in 2008, and then the constant printing of money, I think more and more people are learning about how fiat works. I'm talking about the layman, and I'm hearing more and more people raising the narrative. Oh, they just print money. Everyone's kind of getting the gist now that the system is flawed.
Yeah.
It's not a hidden thing anymore. It's like become common knowledge. Even your auntie G is saying it's all fraudulent.
Yeah.
Everyone is saying it now. So at some point in the next decade, I think it's going to become normal. I actually, as just one last point, Sheikh Abdul Rahman al-Barrak, in his fatwa where he said that Bitcoin is halal, he himself mentioned that he used to say it was haram, and after reanalyzing the situation, he discovered that the objections made against Bitcoin also applied to the current system.
Yes.
But he came to that realization after re-looking at it. He realized, wait, the things I objected to already exist anyway. So it's not really an objection. But that came through knowledge, and I would say more importantly, it came through this humbling act which everyone has to go through to ask the question, do I actually understand what's going on?
Yeah.
Unless you humble yourself to realize, I actually don't know, I'm going to look, then it won't happen. You have to humble yourself. You have to really humble yourself. But yeah, that's it really.
Yeah.
I think we've had a very good spaces. I think it was one of my favorite ones actually I've ever heard. Mashallah. Thanks very much to Haris for your contribution. You've added so much value to the ummah. Inshallah ta'ala, I ask Allah to blessing and barakah in what you do.
Exactly.
And hopefully, I hope it's inspired everyone here to understand that what Haris has done is not unique to him. Everyone here has the capacity at some level to do something.
Absolutely.
Even if it's just to educate someone or point someone in the right direction, you don't have to make some elaborate contract that saves the world. You can just do something very small to save one person who can then save another one. I mean, that's literally it. So hopefully, inshallah, we can all do our bit to help fight this sickness of riba and this disease of short-time preferences. And inshallah, we can see in our lifetimes the solution available to everyone. Inshallah ta'ala. Jazakallah khair, brother.
Jazakallah khair. Thank you so much for having me. Really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me on.
Jazakallah khair. Hayakum Allah.
Alaikum salam.